Alright, so we're kind of in between seasons here in Minnesota. The ice is rotten, so you can't go ice fishing, but yet it's still there, so you can't go open water fishing. We're going to go try some river fishing tomorrow and later this week. Hopefully we have success and you see some videos from that. But in the meantime, this is a great time to find new lakes. So this applies both to spring scouting for the summer and fall scouting for the winter. Alright, so I'll go through my 3 favorite programs to use for this. There's some other ones, I'll mention those briefly, that are similar. Okay, so my 3 favorite programs are Navionics web app, the Minnesota DNR Recreation Compass, and Minnesota DNR Lakefinder. Those last 2 are specific to Minnesota, and I will briefly go through some other alternatives. Most states have some sort of program similar to that. All right, let's jump right in. So I have screen recording on my computer, so I'll go through that here. All right, so this is Navionics web app. I'll leave the link, but basically just Google Navionics web app, and you'll come to this. So what you have, basic map interface, and I'll be using Lake Minnetonka out in the West Metro as an example, since everybody pretty much knows about it, so I'm not ruining anybody's spots. All right, so pretty straightforward, as long as you know what you're looking for. So here I'll look at Wayzata Bay. You have good contour map, and my computer's being kind of slow loading this. Also you have community, so like this is a spot that somebody's left information. They said there's crappies there. Another spot over here, we can look at, see what they said about this spot. Possible walleye flat, right? So people leave community info. Yeah, buoys added here. One important thing to note for Navionics is it's helpful to click this button here and go to sonar charts. So this is actually community edits. So people have, this is from people recording sonar logs on their devices and then uploading that to the Navionics. And so it takes all of that and makes a much higher quality map. All right, another feature that's kind of useful here is this ruler, so you can measure distances and headings. So that's kind of nice if you're plotting across. Okay, how long across the lake am I going to have to go? Another feature is the search. So you hit that search, and so say you can search Minnetonka, and eventually we get that, and it'll show that, right? So if you want to search other lakes. Okay, so that's program number 1. There's also an app for this. Hopefully you know about it and even have it. So it's the Navionics Boating HD. It looks like they've now switched to a subscription model. Looks like it's $22 a year, which is pretty affordable. I actually got years ago, just bought the straight up bought it and have now been grandfathered in, but it looks like that program's been disabled. Okay, so I guess one last thing about these, I use Lake Master charts, Humminbird charts on my graphs, so I just buy the chips. Those maps are far better than these Navionics ones, but they don't really have an equivalent system to this that's anywhere in the ballpark as far as price. There is Humminbird Chart Select. The problem with that is lake maps are $10 to $30 per lake, so that really adds up. But that'd be a better option if you want really high quality, or you're only going to be fishing a few bodies of water. You might want that. This web app is completely free. Like I said, the app, if you don't already have it, is $22 a year for all lakes, US, Canada. So a lot of information there for pretty cheap. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2 is Minnesota DNR Recreation Compass. So this is, for those of you who hunt, basically kind of the free Minnesota version of Onyx Hunt. And it has both hunting and fishing information. So I actually use it for hunting because it has public lands, wildlife management areas, state forests, etc. outlined there. So like here you can see this isn't a huntable area, but it's a scientific and natural area here. So you can see that highlighted. They'll have other areas highlighted like that. So that's for hunting. For fishing, you have a couple different things on here. One, you have a contour map. This isn't nearly as good as Navionics, so I would use Navionics before this. But what you have here is contour map with boat launch info. So this is a boat launch here. So if you click that boat launch, come on, there we go. So it'll say water access. So if you click that, it has information about that. I'll go into this later, but it's kind of nice because it tells you how many ramps, how many parking spots, whether it pays, or whether you have to pay, whether it has restrooms. So that's kind of helpful for scouting lakes. The other thing is you can access my third favorite option or program, which is Lakefinder. So if you just click on a lake here and then click on the little link, it'll go to a version of Lakefinder. So this is kind of the quick version here, but it'll tell you the fish species present, and then you click Lakefinder. It takes you into a slightly different version of what I'm about to go into. So we'll switch over to number 3, which is Lakefinder. Okay, so this is Minnesota DNR Lakefinder. So you can just Google Lakefinder. Same thing with Recreation Compass. Just Google that, and then it says find a lake. So enter a lake. If it's a common lake name like Long, Rice, Mud, you have to enter county because there'll be too many results. Minnetonka, there's only one Lake Minnetonka. Hit get lake data. All right, so once that loads, what you have is a list of results. It'll tell you the county, the nearest town. You don't really have to worry about this ID. You just click on that link, and it brings you, so this is the same thing we saw in Recreation Compass. And actually, this is Recreation Compass right here, so you can use that to move around. So this is kind of the summary page. You have some stats about the lake, interesting if you want. The fish species present, so that's kind of cool to see. All right, and then the real powerful thing, which is the tabs here. All right, so you have Fisheries Lake Survey, that's the main thing. We'll actually look at that last. Water access sites. So this is kind of the more comprehensive version of what I showed you on Recreation Compass. So it shows all the possible sites. Click on the one that, the Grays Bay, the one that we saw earlier. So this is the same information that I showed you over there. How many ramps, spots, restrooms. If they're like a county launch, for instance, that you have to pay, it'll say that here. So that's pretty nice. Okay, so that's the water access sites. Really helpful to find where to launch. Fish stocking. So if you're interested in fishing for a fish species that you rely on stocking for, like muskie or walleye, you can look at the data, the year, the species, the size, number that they stock. I would look at fairly far back. Even muskie fingerlings are 1-year-old fish that are that long, and the fish you're going to want to catch are going to be 5-10 years down the line. So the data further back is actually more important here. All right, the other thing you want to look at if you want to keep fish is fish consumption guidelines for that particular lake. So in a lot of cases, they've actually tested fish out of that lake. So you want to look at this in case there's some pollutant that in that water that makes the fish inedible. There's water level, water clarity, lake depth, if you're interested in that sort of stuff. So lake depth is just their state contour map. Not nearly as good as Navionics, so I wouldn't really go there. Okay, so for the lake survey itself, in another video I'll link up here that serves kind of as an appendix to this video, I go into the gear types and what gear, what they are, what gear you want to look at for different species. So you want more information, you can go check out this card up here. I'll talk more about that. I'll just kind of go briefly through it here. Okay, so in Lakefinder, you see again the stats up here, the water access information, and you can see here there's fee permit. So that's kind of interesting if you want to avoid paying money, maybe avoid that launch. And again, that's a county, which is fairly typical. A lot of counties in Minnesota charge. Okay, so then there's the fish sampled section. I'll go through that in a second. The length of select species sampled section, go through that. And then what I think is actually most informative, which is the status of the fishery, kind of a summary. So some general information, And then say you want to look at a certain species like bluegill, you can scroll down here to bluegill, and it gives you kind of a summary. So the bluegill were sampled, and they averaged 5.9 inches and 0.17 pounds. And they were caught at this rate, which is very high for this type of lake. Okay, so that's what you want to look at. In the summary, they will tell you straight up how or if they caught a lot of fish compared to similar lakes and how big they are. So look straight for that. You can go, okay, there's a lot of fish in this lake, but they're kind of on the small side, or the other way around, or whatever, and decide whether you want to fish that lake based on that. And they do this for all the different species. So bass, muskie, perch, etc. Okay, so now back up to the data itself. And again, in that video, I'll put another card up here again, and I describe the gear types and what you want to look for. So I'll just briefly go through. So bluegill, like I say in that video, you want to look at the trap net data. And so here they say that the CPUE, catch per unit effort, was almost 73. So that's 73 fish per net per night. And you look at the normal range here, and it's far above the normal range. So these values in and themselves don't really mean anything absolutely. You just want to look at how they compare to other lakes. So if you have another lake pulled up, that's helpful to compare there. And then the average weight. And so you can just compare the size structure and the numbers. All right. So another species that I like fishing for is largemouth bass. As I explained in that other video, what you actually want to look at is the standard electrofishing, since they're not sampled well by gill nets or trap nets. And again, this number, it doesn't actually provide the range, but you can compare here the CPUE number to other lakes. So say another lake had CPUE of 30, another lake had a CPUE of 100, right? That gives you an idea of the relative numbers of bass in each lake. And then the average size or weight here in pounds, so 0.66 pounds, kind of on the small side. One thing to think about when looking at these numbers is that they're aiming to sample the average population, a representative population. And large, very large fish, which a lot of people like myself like to catch, are not really representative. That's kind of the whole point. They're rare, right? And so these surveys are intentionally not targeting those large fish in particular. We want to, get kind of the average of the population. So just because you don't see a very large fish on there doesn't mean that there isn't one. So for instance, if you look at the select species, you look at largemouth bass here, the largest they caught was apparently 19 inches, which isn't that big a bass. Nice bass, but it's not a record. There are very large bass in Lake Minnetonka. Everybody knows that. They just weren't caught in this survey. So don't let that deter you if there isn't a really big fish, that species there. You're kind of looking more at the average. Okay, so for the select species sampled, pretty simple. There's the weight bin, or the length bins here in inches. So look at bluegill. There were a lot of bluegill between 0 and 5. A lot of bluegill between 6 and 7. Very few 8 and above. So that somewhat small bluegill population. Look at bass, kind of a nice spread throughout the sizes. Not that many in the 15 to 19, but looks like a pretty good lake. Pike actually look really good here. So there's not too many in the real small sizes. Quite a few in the 15 to 19, which is kind of on the small side, but plenty in the 30 to 34. So some nice pike in this lake. So things to look for, just look at that spread. And again, just because if you're looking for really big fish and there isn't a really big fish here, doesn't mean there isn't a really big fish in that lake. So take that with a grain of salt. All right, so I want to briefly go through the Wisconsin version of Lakefinder, which is called Find a Lake. So again, most DNRs or Fish and Wildlife organizations for a state will have some sort of program like this. So just if you're not fishing in Minnesota, it doesn't mean you don't have it. Okay, so here's Wisconsin's. It's called Find a Lake. And this one's actually kind of easier to find lakes because you can go well, I want to search by largemouth bass. And so these are lakes where they said there's largemouth bass. I don't know what this lake's like, but so there's a lot less information present here. So 19-acre lake, maximum depth 25 feet, and it just says present. So if you look at, and then you can look at facts and figures here, get a little more information. So again, not nearly as much information provided by Wisconsin, but it's actually kind of easier to search. You can, their search is a little bit better in Minnesota. Okay, so those are my 3 favorite methods for scouting out lakes in between seasons. So hopefully this video is helpful. And again, if you want more information on the fisheries survey side, I have another video providing that. If you like this video, please like it and comment, especially if you have any questions. And have a good season. Stay healthy during this troubling time, and see you on the water.